Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we unpack the sources you share with us, looking for those really key insights. Today, we're tackling something, well, pretty much everyone hits on a serious learning journey, that point where the initial excitement, fades and progress feels like it's just grinding to a halt. It's often called the Great Plateau. And our sources today, they don't just explain it. They give us a really fascinating blueprint for, well, getting through it, thriving, actually.
Exactly. This great plateau, it's that really frustrating point where the quick wins you got as a beginner just slow right down, almost disappear sometimes. And for you as a C1 advanced English learner, that can be particularly, well, tricky because you've already climbed so high, right? You can handle complex chats, read difficult stuff, but that feeling of like effortless mastery, it still feels far off. And that's the point where a lot of people, honestly, they give up. Not because they're not passionate, but maybe they misunderstand motivation. Our sources, they show that the folks who push past this, they don't have some magical endless supply of drive. Instead, they see motivation as like a system you build, a fire you have to tend to, a skill you practice.
Right. So think of this deep dive as your guide, maybe, to becoming an architect of your own drive. That's a nice phrase. We're going to break down how motivation really works, look at the kind of mental armor you need for setbacks, and lay out practical steps, real strategies that separate the people who stick with it from those who, well, fall away. And this isn't just about English, is it? It's about learning how to keep learning when things get tough, no matter what you're learning. Okay, so let's start with the fuel itself, motivation. Our sources dig into something called self-determination theory, SDT. It's pretty big in psychology, and it makes this key distinction, right, between two main types, extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic is the external stuff. Rewards, avoiding punishment, like studying for a grade or maybe a promotion at work. It can definitely give you a boost at the start, but what happens when that reward is gone? Or you get it?
Exactly. That's the potential problem. The activity just becomes a means to an end. And once you reach that end, the reason for doing it can just fizzle out. What's really interesting here, especially for something long and complex like mastering the language, is intrinsic motivation. That comes from, the sheer joy or satisfaction in the activity itself. Think of a writer who just has to tell a story. Or, for you, maybe it's the buzz you get from finally understanding a tricky idiom or appreciating some cultural nuance. Our sources bring up J.K. Rowling. Before Harry Potter was, well, Harry Potter, she faced so much rejection. If her motivation was just external fame, money, it's pretty unlikely she'd have kept going through all that. It is that internal fire that need to tell the story that kept her going when things looked bleak externally.
That's a really powerful difference. But okay, for a C1 learner, you might still have those external pressures, right? An exam coming up, needing a certificate for work. How do the sources suggest balancing that? How do you build more of that internal fire without ignoring the practical stuff?
Well, a key idea comes from Daniel Pink, who popularized 3 basic psychological needs from SDT. They are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Autonomy is that feeling of being in control, like you're choosing to learn, not being forced. Competence is feeling effective, seeing that you're making progress. Which, by the way, is why the beginner stage feels so good you see improvements fast. The plateau is tough, partly because that feeling of rapidly gaining competence often stalls out.
Okay, autonomy, competence, and relatedness. How does that fit in when you're hitting that plateau?
Relatedness is that basic human need for connection, to feel part of something, to care for others, be cared for. We're social animals, fundamentally. And trying to learn something difficult completely alone for a long time, that's really hard. It often leads to burnout. So for a C1 learner on the plateau, losing these pillars might look like, well, maybe feeling less autonomy because of a rigid study plan, or that stalled sense of competence we mentioned because progress is slow and, frankly, not very glamorous. And maybe a real sense of isolation if you're just studying by yourself all the time.
So the first step, really, before any tactics, is what our material calls excavating your why, deeply. It strongly suggests taking time for some real, honest self-reflection. Why are you truly learning English? Go past the surface stuff, like career or impressing people. Is it, maybe, to connect with the culture? Read certain books, understand films without subtitles, have deeper conversations. You need to find the reason that really hits you, gives you that spark. That's your intrinsic anchor. Write it down. Seriously, put it where you see it every day. Because when the how feels like a total grind, that deep why is what keeps you pointed in the right direction. Okay, so you've got your why. The next big thing is building systems, robust ones. Our sources really hammer this home. Motivation comes and goes. It's fickle. But discipline, that's reliable. The most successful learners, they don't wait to feel motivated. They build habits, processes that make doing the work almost automatic. the default option. And this leads to a really important shift from focusing only on goals to focusing on systems. Our sources mention the Murakami method here.
Right? We tend to be very goal-oriented. I want to be fluent. I want to write a book. Big, distant goals. But the problem with only having those huge goals is you're kind of always feeling like you haven't succeeded yet. You're in this state of pre-success failure until the very end. A system, though, is different. It's the set of actions you do regularly that makes achieving the goal much more likely. A goal is the marathon. The system is running 3 times a week. Every week, you succeed every single time you follow your system. That reinforces competence, which we know is crucial. Haruki Murakami, the novelist, he's famous for his incredibly strict routine, wakes up at 4 a.m., writes for hours, then runs or swims. He just does it every day when he's writing a novel. He says the repetition itself becomes almost meditative. And his amazing output, it's not from some grand dream alone, it's from that relentless, often pretty unglamorous system.
So what's crucial for you listening is to design your system, your specific learning system. Get away from just become fluent. Define real, concrete actions, things that are easy to start daily or weekly. Our sources suggest things like, every morning, 7.00 to 7:20, review vocabulary with Enki. Simple. Or Tuesdays and Thursdays, 30-minute chat with my language partner. Or maybe every weekend, watch one English movie, no subtitles, write a short summary, like 150 words. See how that shifts the focus from this huge, scary outcome to a manageable process. You get small wins every time you do your system task, and that directly feeds that feeling of competence.
And to help make those systems stick, there's a great concept from Atomic Habits, lowering the activation energy, using the 2-minute rule. Basically, our brains often make starting something new seem harder than it is. Psychologists call this activation energy. The genius of the 2-minute rule is it bypasses that initial hurdle. You make the very first step ridiculously easy.
Right. So instead of read an English novel, it becomes read 1 page. Study advanced grammar turns into open my grammar book to the right chapter. Write in my English journal is just write 1 sentence. The key insight isn't that you only do 2 minutes. It's about making starting so easy, you trick your brain's resistance. And usually once you've started, you find you keep going for longer anyway. It's like opening the door.
Exactly. It's the gateway to sustained effort. Now, okay, you have your why, you have your systems, but you're still going to struggle sometimes. You'll hit roadblocks. How you interpret those struggles, that perceived lack of progress on the plateau, that makes a massive difference in whether you quit or keep going. Motivation is totally connected to mindset. And our sources really stress that mindset isn't fixed. You can actually work on it, reshape it.
Yeah, this brings us to embracing the dip, which is a powerful idea from Seth Godin. He argues that basically anything worthwhile mastering a language, building a business, learning an instrument involves this dip. It's that long, hard grind between the initial fun part and the eventual payoff of mastery, where the work gets harder and the results seem smaller. And most people, he says, they quit right there in the dip. But Godin flips it. He says that's why the people who get through become so valuable, so rare, because most people don't make it. So that frustration you might feel on the learning plateau, it's not a sign you're failing. It's a sign you're on the right track. It's the price of admission, basically.
Think about Colonel Sanders. Our sources mention him. He was in his 60s, living on Social Security, when he started trying to franchise his chicken recipe. Apparently, he got rejected over 1,000 times before finding his first partner. Imagine that. He went through a dip that lasted decades. It would have crushed almost anyone. But his persistence through that huge trough is what eventually led to KFC. He kind of instinctively knew the dip wasn't just a roadblock. It was where the real lasting success was actually forged.
That makes a lot of sense. But just knowing the dip exists is one thing. How do we actually, equip ourselves to get through it?
Well, our sources then talk about learned optimism from Dr. Martin Seligman, a key figure in positive psychology. He found that how resilient we are isn't just about what happens to us. It's deeply affected by our explanatory style, which is just how we explain bad events or setbacks to ourselves internally. Pessimists tend to see setbacks as permanent. We'll never get this grammar. Pervasive. I'm bad at everything in English. And personal. It's me. I'm just not smart enough. And that kind of thinking leads to feeling helpless, like you can't change things. Optimists, though, they frame setbacks differently. As temporary, I didn't get it this time. Specific, I struggle with this type of idiom, but my conversation is okay. And external or non-personal, maybe the explanation wasn't clear.
And for a C1 learner who's probably dealing with subtle, annoying, persistent errors, this feels incredibly relevant.
Oh, absolutely. That optimistic style actively helps you bounce back. Resilience. The story of Chris Gardner. The pursuit of happiness is a powerful example of this in action. Facing homelessness, huge pressure, but he never fell into that "why me?" victim mindset. He consistently saw his awful situation as temporary and his challenges as specific problems he could solve with effort and creativity. His belief, despite everything, really embodies that resilient explanatory style.
So the practical thing here is to actually audit and reframe your self-talk. Next time you make a mistake, you mess up a tense, forget a word, don't catch something someone says fast, really listen to that voice in your head. What story does it tell immediately? Is it leaning pessimistic? I'll never get this. I'm terrible at listening. If it is, you need to consciously, deliberately reframe it. Instead of "I'll never master phrasal verbs," try shifting it to, okay, I haven't found a good way to learn phrasal verbs yet. Find a different angle. Instead of "my listening is terrible," maybe I find fast colloquial speech hard, so I need specific practice on that. This isn't just about thinking happy thoughts. It's a cognitive technique. It keeps you in control of your own learning journey, even when it's demanding. Okay, final piece here. Our sources point out that willpower, well, it runs out. It's a finite resource. So just trying to brute force your way through the dip with sheer willpower, it's probably not going to work long term. It's a losing strategy. Instead, the really successful learners, they actively set up their environment. They make the good habits easy and the bad habits hard. This clever way of thinking is called choice architecture, and it often uses something called commitment devices.
Yeah, your environment is constantly nudging you, right, towards some things, away from others.
Yeah.
If your phone is right there on your desk while you study, it's nudging you towards distraction. Obvious, but true. If your grammar book is buried under a pile of papers, it's nudging you to avoid it. So choice architecture is about consciously designing those nudges. Make it harder to do the things you want to avoid. Use app blockers. Leave your phone in another room when you study. And conversely, make the good habits easier. Lower the friction. Lay out your study stuff the night before. Make your study space somewhere you actually want to be.
And commitment devices are kind of a stronger version of that, right? More deliberate. It's where you make a choice now that locks you into doing the right thing later. The classic example is Victor Hugo, apparently. He had his servant lock away his clothes, so he physically couldn't go outside until he finished writing The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Okay, maybe I don't need to go that far. But you could, say, pay up front for an advanced English course that's non-refundable, or schedule that important language exam you can't easily back out of, or even just promise a friend you'll send them a progress report every week. These all create external accountability, which can be really powerful.
And this brings us nicely back to relatedness, that third pillar of self-determination theory. Connection. Trying to learn something hard, totally alone for a long time, is one of the quickest ways to lose motivation. When you struggle by yourself, it's so easy to think you're the only one finding it hard, that your problems are unique. Connecting with others, especially people on a similar path, it shatters that illusion. Our sources mention the Inklings, that famous group at Oxford with C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. They met regularly, read their work aloud, gave feedback. It was in that circle trust, challenge, shared passion that huge works like The Hobbit and Narnia took shape. It's hard to imagine Tolkien finishing his massive Middle-earth project without the consistent encouragement, feedback, and just sense of shared purpose from his friends. That community gave him accountability, sure, but also vital emotional support.
So the action step here is clear. Proactively build your Inklings, find your people, actively look for connections relevant to your C1 level. Find a dedicated language partner for advanced chats. Join a C1 study group, online or maybe in person. Hire a tutor who specializes in advanced learners for regular challenging sessions, or even just ask a supportive friend or family member to be your accountability buddy for your learning system. Sharing the struggle, celebrating the small wins with others, it changes everything. It turns what could be a lonely battle into a shared journey. Makes it sustainable.
Yeah, so if we pull all these threads together, look at the bigger picture, it's really clear motivation isn't some magic fountain you just find. Our sources show it's more like an entire ecosystem you have to actively build and take care of. It's got the deep roots of your intrinsic why, the sturdy trellis of your daily systems, the nutrient-rich soil of a resilient mindset, and the gentle rain of a supportive community. And that whole ecosystem, that's what keeps you going when the climb gets really tough, when the hair gets thin near the summit.
And here's a really important way to think about it, especially for you listening. That deep frustration you might feel on the plateau, it's not a signal to quit. Our sources describe it as a genuine rite of passage. It's the quiet, sometimes grueling day in, day out work that actually builds real mastery. When you look at people like Rowling, Murakami, Chris Gardner, Tolkien, our sources remind us they weren't superhuman. They didn't have endless willpower. They were people who understood, maybe consciously, maybe not, that the secret to doing amazing things is often just how well you manage the ordinary difficult days. As a C1 learner, you've already shown incredible discipline, curiosity, and ability to get this far. That's huge. You're essentially standing right at the base of that final peak. And yeah, the path ahead will be challenging, no doubt. But hopefully now you feel like you have more of a blueprint, the right tools to navigate.
Which leads to a really important question for you to think about. What's one specific, real action you'll commit to this week? Something to anchor yourself in your purpose. Or solidify your systems. Or maybe bravely reframe a struggle. Or actively find your tribe. How are you going to intentionally look after that fire of your motivation? Not just watching it flicker, but being its dedicated, proactive keeper. Because really, it's right there in the heart of the struggle, on that tough, often unglamorous face of the Great Plateau, that the true mountaineer's heart is forged.